Welcome to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest running hiking podcast, downloaded over 1.2 million times worldwide and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. We're your hosts, Tim and Jill Savage, coming to you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country.
In today's episode 342, brought to you by Australian Hiker, we're going to go through and discuss how do you prioritise your ever-growing list of hikes to make sure you get as many done as you can and in the correct order. We hope you enjoy. If you'd like to help support Australian Hiker in this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by subscribing on your podcast host of choice so that each episode is available as soon as it's published. And if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the supporters page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. Since we started Australian Hiker in 2016, I've done an awful lot of reading about hiking and interviewed so many people about some amazing adventures they've done. What this has resulted in is me picking up a lot of knowledge that I didn't have, particularly about some overseas hikes, but it's also enthused me to increase my ever-growing bucket list of hikes that I want to go through and do. More recently, I've come to realise that at some stage I won't be able to physically do every walk on my list, and even though the plan is in the next few years to do at least 3 long-distance walks a year, at some stage as I get older, I'm eventually going to slow down. So quite arbitrarily, I decided that I have roughly 30 long-distance walks left in me, in addition to all the shorter walks. And as such, I've come to the conclusion that I need to prioritise these walks just in case I don't get to the end of this list. Now, this list currently contains 24 walks. Roughly 18 months ago, it contained 14 walks. And every time I talk to someone about a new walk, I just seem to add it to the list. So essentially, what it comes down to is I need a bigger bucket as there are too many good walks and not enough time to do them. So what I need to do is to consider prioritising these walks. And if you think about bucket lists in its true sense, it's often associated with people coming towards the end of their life or having some sort of medical condition, and they've got a batch of things they want to do while they still have the time. So in this case through here, there are so many walks that I do want to do, but if I do run out of time, how do I prioritise them and do the ones that I really want to do first up rather than leaving to something I'm really interested in and finding out that I'm physically unable to do it in 10 or 15 or 20 years' time?
While I'm sitting here having a bit of a chuckle at Tim, thinking he might not have enough time left, I guess there is something in here about just jumping in and doing what you need to do when you can do it and not waiting too long as well.
And the reason I'm doing this podcast and the written article is Jill said you're not going to have enough time to do all these walks.
Well, you're going to have to live until you're 125 or something like that. I'm not sure I'll be around then, but...
So in deciding how to prioritise these walks, in most cases it's not about the walks themselves, but rather what I or we get out of them. The following podcast identifies a list of priorities in no particular order that we have gone through, or at least I've gone through, to help me decide which walks we're going to do. And these priorities are purely our own, and you may find that you have your own different set of priorities that applies to you. So use this as a guide to building your own bucket list. First up, we're going to look at climate and environment. I think Jill is thinking the same thing as I am, but I'm not sure on this one. I personally prefer climates that are arid, and by arid I mean slightly on the drier side and not humid. Humidity just knocks me around too much, whereas my personal preference climate-wise is probably around about 15 degrees. It's not too hot. You don't the heat doesn't suck the life out of you by the end of the day. You're able to do bigger days when it's a bit cooler. So as such, I prefer to do my own walks, or our walks for that matter, towards the end of winter. And this is assuming that they are walks that can be done at that time of the year, because there are certainly some walks on this list that would be in the middle of snow conditions, and I'm not into hiking in snow.
I'm not into hiking in snow either. I think I can do a little bit of that, but perhaps not day in and day out. I guess in terms of the moisture, for me, it's more about moisture on the ground, because I absolutely hate leeches. So you can get leeches in warm climates and cool climates. I'm out of there either way. So that would be the thing for me, not so much the general wetness, if you like, more about the moisture. And yeah, I'm very conscious that we've been in Tassie and it's been very cool, and I've discovered leeches crawling over my boots. I was not happy.
And I suppose when you think about Tasmanian walks, I mean, the general train of thought when you think about Tasmania is they do have quite high rainfall compared to a lot of other areas in Australia. So the overland track, when we did that, I think we had one day where we had a bit of rain for a couple of hours and that was it. The rest of it was dry, which surprised us. But given the choice, the Three Capes walk, which is a coastal-based walk in Tasmania, very different sort of climate. And I do like coastal Tasmania as opposed to inland Tasmania because of the leeches, because of the wet conditions, because of the mud.
Well, I'm thinking that the leeches in Tassie were on the way to Cradle Mountain, Tim.
Yeah, they were.
I was not happy. That was a bit of a surprise.
Now, I think, in all honesty, I don't think I actually got a leech on that trip.
Yeah, I know. I know. Thank you.
But there was one night where there was some people that were setting. Their choice was to either set up inside the cabin or to put a tent up outside, and they'd put a tent up outside, and within about an hour they'd packed up and come back into the cabin because the leeches were crawling all over the outside of the tent.
Well, at least they were on the outside.
They were. So from there, we're going to look at complexity. Now, it depends on what sort of experience you really want as far as walks are concerned. Do you just want to be able to go to the trailhead, follow the arrows all the way through and not have to put much thought into the trail, or do you want something a bit more complex? And a good example here would be the Australian Alps walking track at around about 650 kilometres roughly. This is probably one of our most complex walks. And when you compare it to the Hyson Trail in South Australia at roughly 1,200 kilometres and the Bibbulmun Track in Western Australia, roughly 1,000 kilometres, they are both physically easier walks to walk and to plan. Now, I did say easier and not easy, but certainly with the Australian Alps walking track, you typically have to cache food. With the other two trails we mentioned just then, you will be walking through towns or through resorts, and you can pick up stuff as you go. Whereas with the Australian Alps walking track, it's not easy to get to the towns. There are a couple of areas where you do go through a resort or close by, but you've got to walk off trail to get there. So I think, the Australian Alps walking track, people say, it's one of our shorter long-distance trails, but it is one of the more complex ones as well. And it depends on what sort of experience you want. If you want lots of planning and lots of thought about where food is and how you're going to get out of there in case there's a problem, then again, the Australian Alps walking track, in my case, will be the last of the three walks, the big three, our Australian Triple Crown of walks that I'll end up doing. And partly, I was planning on doing it a few years ago, as I was planning on doing the Hyson Trail. In the case of the Hyson, COVID stopped me from doing that. In case of the Australian Alps walking track, the bushfires gone through, and I could not get a connected run through. I could do sections of it, but not all of them. And even the Victorian government saying they prefer people not do it because there are a lot of trees that were down. It's going to make it very difficult for people.
Yeah, and the other thing, I mean, you talked about those two aspects being complexity aspects, but also the navigation of the Australian Alps walking track is quite different to a whole lot of other trails that are available. And particularly when you compared it to the Bibbulmun, the navigation is much more complex on the Australian Alps walking track.
Yeah, definitely. And there's one section I have done 120 12 kilometres of the Australian Alps walking track, and that was from Kyandra through to Canberra. And there was a sign I came across that said, "Here's the rough compass bearing you want. There are no marked trails." Now, there was enough of a worn trail that you could tell where you were going. But, I mean, it was just these open grassy plains, and you just had to go on a rough compass bearing to get it to where you were heading to.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's while there are management roads and lots of sections that are easy to navigate, there are also some more difficult sections as well. Domestic and international trips. Now, this is where it's going to be, do you want to go overseas or do you want to stay in Australia? Now, particularly at the moment, as we're doing this podcast, we've got a war in the Middle East, and trying to get
Is it a war?
Yeah.
We won't go there.
Trying to get international flights at the moment are really difficult and also more expensive. So I think a lot of people who are looking at travelling have probably changed their plans. But when you think about going overseas, going to Europe or going to the USA, you've got an international airfare to get you there. Cost of living in Europe or the USA compared to Australia is more expensive.
And basic things like the exchange rate on the Australian dollar. We went to Hawaii 1 year post-COVID, and seriously, we had to not convert back to Aussie dollars because it was just frightening.
Staying in Australia will often mean your walks will be cheaper. Not just the airfares, but also in the case of the cost of living. You're used to the currency. The food doesn't automatically double in price, as an example. So,
however, you will need to transport yourself. So maybe the cost of petrol is something big at the moment.
Cost of petrol at the moment can be more of an issue through there. It's the sort of thing out of my current bucket list, which is roughly around about 24 walks. I think I've got 13 of them are international ones, and there are some that I will do in the next couple of years, but I'm more likely to do the Australian ones first. And I include in that one of the international walks is New Zealand. It's close enough to the east coast of Australia. It's no further travel than it would be to get to Perth.
Oh, okay, but we'll not annex New Zealand as part of Australia, though, Tim.
No. Distance and duration is the next one. And by this, I'm talking about how long is the walk? Is the walk 500 kilometres or 1,000 kilometres or 2,000 kilometres? And that's also going to impact on how long the walk is going to take to go through and do. As an example through here, I am planning on, all things being given equal, due to the Hyson Trail later on this year. I'm allowing approximately 50 days. So that's basically 8 weeks. Now, whether I need that much time or not, but I'm allowing it. And trying to get 8 weeks off when you're working for somebody else or you're employed by somebody else, and you've got to be back at a certain time. So you can't say, "Oh, look, things are going wrong here. I need to take an extra couple of weeks." But certainly that duration makes it quite hard. And, typically you don't have 8 weeks of holiday a year. So you've got to plan it well in advance. So I think the whole concept of duration, and Jill's personal preference is not to do walks longer than 2 weeks in duration, although she has said she'll do the Camino with me, which is good. But there are some conditions on that. She said she wants to stay in hotels, not in the shared accommodation, which I can perfectly understand. So the duration and the distance really is one of the more impacting factors, I suppose. I mean, when I'm going through and talking about doing prioritising walks, really what I'm talking about is the long distance walks, not the walks that are 5, 10, 15, 20, even 80 or 90 kilometres. They're the sort of things that I can do in a matter of under a week, and they're quite easy to do time-wise, although they can be a bit complex to get there. But when you're talking about a walk, and even if it's a local Australian-based walk that's going to take 4, 6, 8, 10 weeks, or you're going to New Zealand and doing the Te Aroa Trail, and that's 3,000 kilometres, and that's going to take you potentially 3 months to do, you've got your time availability and time away from family is a different sort of complex. So being able to, when you're working full time or you've got a young family, it's really hard to get away to do those longer walks. but certainly having the ability where you're not having to be back at another job at a certain time makes quite a big difference. But even then, I don't want to be away from home most of the year. So there's still a maximum number of weeks that I have, and that's going to impact which walks I do. So it's likely I will end up doing one long walk a year, and I do mean sort of long walk that's 4 to 8 weeks, and then do a number of other shorter walks that might only be a week or 2 weeks in between as well. Emotional attachments. Now, when I'm talking about emotional attachments or emotional investment, it also includes religious connection. So pilgrimage trails such as the Camino or the Japanese Kumano Kodo have spiritual connections for many people. The Kokoda Track in Papua New Guinea has a connection for many Australians, particularly with those with relatives who served in the military who will do this walk. And it's not unusual for a number of people doing Kokoda Track to not be long-distance hikers or much of hikers, and they've done it because their father or their uncle or a relative's done it, and they just want to go through and pay a bit of homage to them and go through and do the walk itself. It's the sort of thing that, if there is some sort of connection, whether it be you have family history for a particular area, you've come from a country and you want to go back and see what it's like, or you have religious connection, and we'll talk more about that timing-wise in a moment. Having said that, the Kokoda Track is not on my bucket list. It's there, it's on the list, but it's not a high priority.
Too many leeches for me.
Yeah, and again, it's the humidity. There are so many other walks that I'd prefer to do first, and if I get time, I will do it, but it's not a high priority for me. There's too many others that I want to do first.
Yeah, but I think you also don't have that emotional pull, and I think that carries a lot of weight and a lot of influence, and, a lot of people do have it, and they will do it despite all the things that detract me from doing it. Yeah, I think for me that emotional connection is probably one of the key things, and other things come a little bit second for me.
Now, are you going to do your walks as a solo or a couple or as a group? Each of these will have their own complexities and their own issues. Now, if you're doing a walk solo, you probably need a bit more experience. If you're doing it as a couple, you've got to have two partners, whether it be friends or a marital partnership, that want to do the same things.
And get on.
And get on, yeah.
And have a plan about what to do when you don't get on those days when you're not getting on.
And doing it as a group. So doing walks as a group, the bigger the group, the slower the group tends to travel. And you do want a group that travels at a similar sort of pace. Nothing worse than having two people, one that travels really fast and one that travels really slowly, and the one that's travelling fast is getting annoyed because they feel like they should be doing more kilometres in a day. Same as within a group. If you've got 10 people in a group, 9 of them travel fast, 1 travels slowly, you want to travel in a group of whatever size, having similar sorts of pace, or being comfortable having the different paces. And it doesn't mean you have to stay together physically through the whole day. You might meet up at lunchtime, you might meet up at the end of the day, but having a plan for what that actually is. In Jill's case, and she may change over the next couple of years, for her 2 weeks tends to be her maximum duration for a walk. As an example, she's never going to do the Hyson Trail, which is going to be
end to end,
which is going to be sort of 8 weeks, or even the Te Aroa in New Zealand, which is roughly just on 3,000 kilometres. And that's going to be sort of that 12 to 14
I'll be waiting
weeks.
at the spa for you, Tim.
Yeah, and that's it. People have different preferences and want to do different things. Everyone only has the same number of hours, and it's what you want to do with those hours, and it's not necessarily the same thing as your partner.
But also I think that comes down to, again, another sort of subtle aspect of why you're doing what you're doing. Is it the experience of it, or is it the challenge of it? And I think for me it's the experience, for you it's the challenge. And so that's why, you navigate towards those longer trips, whereas I, after 2 weeks I go, yep, I know how to do this now. This has been lovely. Thank you. Where is the spa bath and the glass of champagne as a reward at the end?
I'm quite happy with that.
I just can't wait longer than 2 weeks.
Now, having said that, the Camino, which is 800 odd kilometres, Jill said she is happy to do that, providing she doesn't have to stay in the shared accommodation.
And you don't get to stay with me because you say that you want to experience that shared accommodation. So feel free. My ensuite bathroom is my ensuite bathroom.
Yeah. If you are travelling as a couple or as a group, the timing becomes more of an issue. Now, if people are working and they've got to get holidays, it's going to limit when people can go. It can be the sort of thing that, if one of the people or one of the group can only get certain time off and the trail is closed, or it's the poorer conditions to do the trail at that time of the year, that's going to decide when you do that walk. And it might be that, okay, if I'm doing it solo, I might do it this year. If I'm doing it as a couple, it might be next year. If I'm doing it as a group, it might be 2 or 3 years off. It just depends. Because again, trying to do it as a group of 5, 6, 7, 8 people who have all got to try and manage leave or family matters to get away, it will take a bit more time to plan.
Yeah, there's a little bit of herding cats in there too, just to get everybody connected to the same time frame and then to actually lock the dates down.
From here, we look at timing. Now, most trails have an ideal time of the year to walk, and typically this is often based around weather conditions. So Australian Alps Walking Track, unless you are into snow and you have the experience of hiking and sleeping in snow conditions, really it's a 3-season hike. The times to do the Australian Alps Walking Track really is probably from mid-November through to around about late April, early May, avoiding the really hot areas. So avoiding probably December and January and into February. So you're on the shoulder seasons in spring and autumn.
But even then, I mean, you can get snow in those parts of the country. So, being prepared for all of that, I think is, a big consideration as well.
Now, the Hyson Trail, which I'm hopefully going to be doing later on this year, it has sections of the trail that will be closed between the 1st of November and the 1st of May. Now, it's not the whole trail, but it's certain sections. The northern sections close a bit earlier, but they open a bit earlier. The southern sections close a bit later, but open a bit later as well. And that's because of the bushfires, that you don't want to be in the middle of a remote area when there's a raging bushfire going through the area.
Well, you don't want to be there and then a bushfire starts.
No. Now, the other thing from a timing perspective is trails like the Camino de Santiago, whether it's a holy year. Now, holy years mean that the day of St. James, which is the July the 25th, falls on a Sunday. Podcast being recorded in 2026. The next holy year was 2027. We were actually looking at doing the Camino in 2027. Now, what a holy year means is there is roughly double the normal number of people on the trail in a given year. And I think they said in 2022 there was almost 440,000 people on the trail throughout the whole season, not necessarily the whole trail.
Yeah, that's right.
But it means that there was a lot of people.
Busy.
It's busy, accommodation is busy, the restaurants are busy. It makes it a much more complex.
Having said that, if that's important for you, though, to be there during the holy year, then kind of do that, don't you?
Yeah.
You're making that choice to do that.
Yeah. So in our case, we're looking at, I think from memory, we're aiming to do this walk now in 2028. And I think from our perspective, we would do it towards the end of the season, not snow conditions, but not in the middle of summer, which is when all the Spanish people tend to take their holidays as well.
No, not that we've got an issue with Spanish people on holidays, Tim. It's just you don't want to be there when there are others.
Yeah, we basically just want a less crowded experience.
Yeah, so. That's right.
Now, glamping. Now, what I mean by glamping is normally the luxury version of whatever you're going through and doing. So what sort of experience do you want from a hike? In most cases, we do walks. We'll be carrying everything on our backs. But if you say you want to do the overland track or the Camino de Santiago and only carry a day pack, that's an option.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, it will cost you a bit more in transport to get your bag taken onto the next town. But
and for the bottle of wine that you have access to most nights on the overland track. But yeah.
Yeah. So, overland track, there is a private operator that will do that, where you're staying in accommodation, hard accommodation, and you're getting chef-cooked meals, and you've got hot water and a proper bed. But if that's the sort of hiking you want, that's fine. That's
Yeah.
not a problem.
And we have friends who did that who looked at us very strangely when we told them how we did it. But anyway, they said, no, that was wrong. We did it the wrong way.
So again, it's the sort of style that you want. I mean, there are some walks that we want to do. So again, I'll go back to the Australian Alps walking track. Glamping is not an option. You are going to have to carry a pack. You might get a few more food caches, so you may be carrying less weight, but you're still going to be carrying a pack with most of your gear. So if you want a glamping experience with a really lightweight pack, that's probably a trip that you are unlikely to do. And there are other walks that are like that as well. Firstly, I don't think I've got enough time left to do all the hikes that I want to do. So rather than repeating a hike over and over again and missing out on another hike, that's probably the key issue. But the other thing I find as well is when you go through and do a hike, you come away, and the longer you are home or away or have done other things, you have a picture in your mind about what that hike looked like. And it's almost a bit of, you romanticize the experience. And you look back to something you've done a number of years ago and say, oh, that was a really good hike. And you forget about all the bad stuff because, it's the good stuff tends to outweigh it. But you make it better than it actually was. And then you go back and do it again and think, oh, no, that really wasn't as good as I thought I can remember it. And you've actually almost cheapened the experience, if you like. Having said that, our first hike as Australian hiker was the Larapinta Trail in the Northern Territory. That is a hike I still want to go back and do, and I don't know why. I've still got views that I really liked it so much, and if I did go back, I wouldn't do it the same way. I have pictures of starting at Mount Zeal, which would extend the length of the hike, or alternatively, I travelled from west to east. I'd possibly look at doing it from east to west, so it would be a totally different experience, and I'd see it a different way, and I could actually separate from the previous way that I did it. Whereas if I did it in exactly the same way, then I'd be comparing about, was this good or was it something I imagined differently? Again, it's the sort of thing that, do you have time to do the same hike over again, or do you love it so much that that's what you want to do? And that's fine. So as a final thought, if you're an experienced hiker, you'll know the term hike your own hike. And what this means in practice for those that aren't used to this term is do what makes you happy and don't try to please others just because they like something different. If you want a glamping experience and your partner wants a full-on carrying everything experience,
find a different partner. No, don't do that.
Yeah, find a different partner or find a different hiking partner or compromise. But again, you physically may not be able to carry a full pack.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's the sort of thing that doesn't matter how old you are. You just, you could be young and not being able to carry it. And in that sort of situation, you want to make sure that whatever you do is something that makes you happy, because that's what we're there for.
I think the other thing about this, though, is that there are a whole range of different options for most of the hikes, maybe not so much some of the extreme ones that in terms of the longer ones that we've talked about, but even the Kangaroo Island Wilderness Trail. Kelly came with us, our friend, and didn't want to carry her full pack, so had it delivered to the campsite at the beginning of every day. We're sitting there in a locked trailer. So by the time we arrived, all she had to do was, use the code and unlock the trailer and get her pack out. That is a great option for so many people.
Yeah. And it's the sort of thing that, it's whatever makes you happy. That's the priority. And it might be if that's what you want to do, although that's all you're physically able to do, that's going to limit the hikes. And it might say, well, okay, I'm going to focus on hikes that will allow me to do that.
Well, she did want me to go in with her so that the trailer delivery was a little bit cheaper for her, and I had to point out that Tim wouldn't let me do that.
before I started doing this podcast and the written article, I hadn't really thought about how to prioritize walks. And I think it was just what I was doing was building up a whole bucket list of things I wanted to do. Yeah, if all of a sudden I have an accident or I'm physically unable to walk beyond a couple of years' time, I want to make sure that there are some walks that I've done, and if I don't get to the others, it won't be as important for me. So I think going through and prioritizing your walks is a good thing regardless of whether you've got too many in your bucket list. And I want to be able to say that I've done the ones I really want to do first and leave the others to last, just in case I run out of time or ability to do them.
And it's not so much that the others are less important. I think the main thing is there's a collection of criteria that you use and you're looking for the one that hit the most criteria, I think is probably what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And I just hadn't thought about that way before. If I could do 10 walks a year, it wouldn't be an issue. But I mean, I think even if I'm able to, I don't think I'd end up wanting to. Otherwise, I'd never be home. So
I was going to say it might not be an issue for you, but it would be an issue for me.
We hope that this has given you a bit of food for thought about prioritizing what walks are important to you, and hopefully that will make your decision about what walks you are planning on doing and working your way through in some sort of logical sequence that makes you happy, and that's going to be different for everyone. Okay, that's all for me. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast on prioritizing long-distance hikes. Bye for now.
And bye from me.